they were icons and still are. And unfortunately, none of them are flying now, apart from one in the memorial flight, which is the Lancaster. It's surprising how amazing our aircraft manufacturers have been. We've done so many things. I mean, the Spitfire, the Lancaster, obviously. If you go on, like you've got the Hawker Harrier, the Harrier jet itself. That was the Americans thought they invented it, so they didn't. English Electric Lightning was the one before the Harrier, and the Vulcan. And then it goes on. After the Vulcan, we only did cooperation between different countries to build aircraft. The Seppicat Jaguar, the Tornado, they're all built, and the Typhoon, they're all built as a joint thing. The ones that I'm talking about weren't, they were directly built by British aircraft and designed by lot. So, Lancaster, brilliant aircraft. It was classified as one of the best heavy bombers in the Second World War. Reason, it was flight speed was about 300 miles an hour, height about 25,000, which is not too bad, but it could do a long trip. It could do up to 3,000 miles.
Wow.
Because it had big fuel tanks. So it did an awful lot of bombing, which is what it's designed to do. But Barnes-Wallis, heard the name?
Yeah.
Barnes-Wallis invented the bouncing bomb. And Guy Gibson's team practiced flying across the locks and dropping the bomb. Now the theory was that if you had two searchlights, when they got together, and you had to keep them together, which meant you were exactly the right height to do the drop. When you got to the position, come on in.
Hi, sorry.
Climb in. So you get to the point where you drop. Now, what happened is that the bomb hit the water, and because it was already rotating, it bounced its way down, hit the dam, and gently dropped down to the bottom and then blew up. Well, that made a big hole in the dam, and they destroyed loads and loads of factories in the Ruhr that were manufacturing weapons, various sorts. So they did a very good job at slowing down the Germans' ability to replace equipment. Now, the other thing that it did, now this is very, very, very unlikely anyone here has ever heard of it, but at the end of the war, we were rushing to build a nuclear weapon to drop on the Japanese. The Americans did not have an aircraft that could do it. We had the Lancaster, and the Lancaster was quite happy carrying up to, what was it, 5,000 kilos, which is a hell of a load. And it had two wide open bays, so it didn't matter if it was big. Americans had, the best they had was a B-29. And the B-29 had two bomb bays, which weren't long enough to take the nuclear weapon, and so they had to modify several of these aircraft very quickly to drop the bomb. Well, they kept getting it wrong, it just would not work, and the release mechanism quite often didn't let go properly, and it would end up in the back of the aircraft. Anyway, they then said, look, can you have some Lancasters on standby? And so we had 6 Lancasters set up to carry the nuclear bomb. Fortunately, the Americans got it right in the end. They borrowed the Lancaster's dropping equipment so that would work on theirs. And the Lancaster was sort of dropped out then, it disappeared. 7,000 built, there's 2 left flying. 7,000 built by Avro. Avro is the name of the owner of the company. It was A.V. Rowe, and it was just called Avro. And he also was involved in designing other aircraft in that end of that part of the war. He was doing the short Stirling, Halifax, and 1 or 2 others. He was involved in designing and building. Now, he also, his company, built the Vulcan. But before we get to the Vulcan, we start to talk about English Electric Lightning. Anybody heard of it? British electric lightning, absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely stupid. The aircraft had, if you look at the middle one, it actually had two engines, two Rolls-Royce Avons, sat on top of each other. Right? Single seat. This thing, the pilots used to say, it's like being strapped on a rocket. It's just incredible. The speed it could do was Mach 2.5, which is fast, over 1,000 miles an hour. 1,500 actually, 1,500 miles an hour it could do. Yes, well, yeah, it could overtake the Concorde, and it did. Now, the Lightning was used officially to intercept Russian aircraft coming in the Cold War. So if Russia decided to come and bomb us, the Lightnings would be sent up to take them out. They never ever got used in war, ever. It never happened. But one of them did shoot down an aircraft. It was a Harrier, pilot ejected, and the plane carried on flying. And they didn't want it to land somewhere that it shouldn't in East Germany, so the Lightning went in and shot it down. So that's the only time they ever shot anything down. So what does the Lightning do? Fast, yes, it was the first aircraft to do a vertical climb and break the sound barrier. So it just sat on its tail, went straight up and broke the sound barrier. It also set the record for the height. No one had ever flown that high before in a supersonic jet. The Americans, of course, had their Blackbird, the SR-71. That was the Blackbird. It was designed as a reconnaissance aircraft to fly with cameras over the border, run along the border of Russia and film what they could. Russians could not shoot it down. It was too high. Well, Lightning was supposed to do 60,000 feet. Blackbird was running about 70,000. So what happened was, this is really, really complex stuff. You had to work out what your trajectory was to make sure you got to the Blackbird at the right time, so that you could do something about it. They tried quite a few times and failed, but twice they managed to do it. And what happened was that they got to the Blackbird, shot across the front of it, went up round the back and locked on their missiles to shoot it down. So they sort of, we've been spotted and shot down. So they did that twice, and the Americans really didn't like it because it was never ever published. And it's about 1996 when these things got released. Now to move on to our lovely Vulcan. Now, that aircraft, I don't think anybody that sees it fly has ever thought rubbish. It was beautiful. It was also the test bed for the Concorde engines, the Olympus. But it did a few things that people could not believe. And there's all the usual stuff. It was a bomber and it could go in. It could fly at 600 miles an hour, this delta wing bomber. It did something which Americans kept away from the public until 1996. And this was 1961 when they did it. The Americans decided to hold a sky shield exercise. They boasted that they had 99% coverage to stop anybody coming into America and dropping a nuclear bomb. 99%. So, they had this exercise, Sky Shield. 4 Vulcans were based in the Bahamas, 4 were in Norway, and they all flew to America with loads of other NATO aircraft. Now, of course, the Vulcan was way up above anything the American fighters could do, so they were trundling along. They formed up this V section where you've got 2 aircraft and 1 aircraft and 1 aircraft, and the idea was the one in the front was the one which was going to do the bombing. The others had massive electronic countermeasures, and so the Americans couldn't see it. They had no idea what was going on, and so they came in through Florida and bombed Miami, and then they went through the top end and bombed New York. And there was sort of all hell broke loose in NORAD. They really could not believe that these sort of Brits had come up with something that could get through. And so the next year they did the same thing, and the same thing happened. The Vulcans got through. And then they stopped doing that exercise. But it wasn't until 1996 they admitted that there was this problem they had. So this is just 3 of our aircraft. The modern ones, Jaguar, Tornado and Typhoon, were all ones I've actually worked on. So, Tornado's out of service now. It's gone and the Typhoon's taken its place. Jaguar went out a while ago, and Hawk, which is another one I worked on, and that's actually still flying with the red arrows, so, and it's still being used as a trainer now. So we should be really proud of our manufacturing capabilities with aircraft, lots of other things as well, but aircraft is just, that you can't miss, it's there out in the open. A lot of other stuff like the graphite systems and things like that, you don't see that. But aircraft, and my favourite has got to be the Vulcan. Oh, the other thing it did, which again, it was really something, it flew to the Falklands and dropped bombs on the runway. Now, can you imagine 2 aircraft flying that far and getting back? No, it did. They lost one. One broke its refuelling nozzle, and so it had to go to Brazil, the nearest place. Brazil said, sod off, you're not coming here. And they said, fine, if you don't let us in, we're going to crash land in your Rio Bay. They're sort of, you can come. So just whenever you look around, see at these memorial flights, you'll see a Lancaster, a Spitfire and a Hurricane. They're the 3 Second World War. We don't have a flying Vulcan anymore. And we don't have any of the older ones either. They're not flying, unfortunately. You can see them in the museums. Museums have got them all. Last time I went to a museum, I saw the Tornado, and I just couldn't believe how big it was. I really sort of thinking of the Lightning size, but it's not. It's huge. So go to a museum and look at these aircraft.